from. My name's Martin. You can probably tell from the accent where I come from, just down the road. And I have a great pleasure, obviously, to introduce this event tonight. It's been building in conversation between Stephen and Neil, so that's what we're going to try attempt to do anyway. And I'll be here just to hopefully introduce it and then sort of move it along. And at the end, we'll have some questions as well too, if you want to ask any particular topic that we haven't sort of covered. So even though these two sort of legends of Irish culture, on one hand we've kind of got sort of a double whammy tonight. We've got what I would consider the greatest Irish director we've ever had, and that's just one of the things he happens to do in his spare time. A lot of people, myself included, regard Stephen as our greatest Irish actor. So we're here tonight really to celebrate the launch of Neil's memoir, which is obviously a really tricky title that could easily trip someone like me up, Amnesiac. But it's given us then the opportunity to bring these two people who've basically been working creatively collaborating for over 40 years. So tonight I hope we'll get some insights into how that dynamic works, because I've been trying to talk to Stephen about it for years and he doesn't say anything. So, obviously maybe he's just a better luck than I. So even though this is a little bit like, I was thinking about this coming up on the Rovens area, it's a little bit like someone's published a memoir, where's him and Andrews when he did them? So there's a little bit of that tonight as well too, because really over the 300 pages of the memoir, we do get some extraordinary glimpses into, I would say, Neil's inner life, his creative life, the sort of role of his parents in his creative life, the northern conflict, the north, there's a really strong connection in Neil's work and in his life really, with where we've grown up, and hopefully we'll obviously explore that. But what I wanted to do first of all was sort of trace the meeting between these two before we get started. If we go to the 1970s, there are actually these two individuals were on very different kind of cultural paths. Neil burst onto the literary scene in the late 70s with his short story collection, Night in Tunisia. And he won the Guardian Fiction Prize. And there's one little section of the book which we're hoping Neil will start tonight with reading in a few moments, where there's an award ceremony. So it's a literary award ceremony. So here sitting in Seamus Heaney Home Place, someone, obviously we're honouring who won the Nobel Prize for literature, and what better sort of way to start tonight, but looking at what maybe can also happen in an award ceremony. So that's one of the, I think, interesting sort of stories that you come across in the memoir. So while Neil is sort of on a sort of literary journey, Stephen, meanwhile, is working with playwrights like Samuel Beckett, Sam Shepard, Brian Friel. And in 1980, Stephen and Brian set up Field Day Theatre Company in Derry, and with their first work translations, I think they started a national conversation about the role that theatre could play in changing the cultural climate. And then a year or two later, Seamus Heaney joined the board of Field Day, and he wrote the Curate Troy. So that's just to sort of, I suppose, in a sense, put some context in the way we're here as well too. It's very appropriate to have this kind of conversation here tonight, because there was, obviously, Seamus was very much involved in Field Day, and Field Day obviously was a project that Brian and Stephen started, and in a sense its legacy is very much part of the cultural fabric, not just of Derry, but Ireland as well. So a few years later then, the roads kind of converge, and it's a completely different medium that the two people that Stephen and Neil started collaborating on. It's a medium of cinema, and cinema up to that point wouldn't have been really something that Ireland was that well known for. There might have been a lot of international images like The Quiet Man or whatever, or Ryan's Daughter, but the notion of an indigenous Irish cinema really just didn't exist. So when they collaborated together on Angel, and again that story is told in the book, so we might explore that tonight as well too. In hindsight, looking back on it, that really was the moment of the birth of an indigenous Irish cinema that could rival American cinema and even British cinema. So in a sense, we've kind of covered three mediums there, literature, theatre and film, and they have that breadth of experience and creativity sitting obviously here with us tonight and having the chance obviously to explore some of the threads of the book all sorts of other things which maybe I'll park for a minute, and we can bring them up a little bit later. But I hope that will give you some flavour of sort of what's in the book. You know, there's a lot of things that, in a sense, maybe people would have known before. I didn't know about your relationship with Stanley Kubrick, Neil, you know, because I happen to be one of the people who worship at his shrine every morning. and to know that when he saw Angel, he contacted you, invited you out. You know, this is a man who, of course, has a reputation as being some sort of, hermit, which is completely untrue in the reality. But, you know, he keeps popping up in the book. And, you know, and I'm thinking when I'm seeing him popping up all the time, I'm going, this is so interesting because in his films, particularly in the 60s and 70s, Kubrick tapped into all the big political, social, and cultural issues of what was going on. And then looking at your own work and what you've kind of done to sort of explore very controversial issues in Irish society, representation of sexuality, race, never mind the politics of this place. You know, I kind of think that to me, you seem like kind of kindred spirits. And that was something that was a complete revelation to me. So that's just me as a sort of film fan saying what I find sort of very, very interesting in the book. If others are interested in more literature, short stories, I think there's an encyclopedic sort of range of experience in Neil's life up to now, and it's fantastic you've actually opened the book and shared that with us. So that's probably enough from me, if you'd mind doing that. Yeah, could you read that?
Okay, I'm going to read a tiny section, okay, a very small section, which Stephen is not in. Okay. This is, I'll just read it, okay, I won't say anything about it. It's called London. It seems paradoxical or counterintuitive or just plain weird, but the thing I remember about London in the late 70s and early 80s, you can hear me, yeah? Yeah. Was the warmth of the reception a young Irish immigrant refugee received. This was a London without the need for illegal squats, casual labour and street sleeping. And this in the worst period of the IRA bombing campaign, the days of the unrelenting Margaret Thatcher. But it was as if a different person had arrived on those shores from a plane, this is me, from a plane this time, not a boat or a train. No more Holyhead and Euston Green. I was awarded the Guardian Fiction Prize along with a Zimbabwean writer, Dambudzo Marachera. My book was called Night in Tunisia, his was called The House of Hunger. The reception was held in the huge mirrored lobby of the Theatre Royal Drury Lane. I wore a maroon double-breasted jacket with a stripe. Dambudzo wore a coloured poncho and a cowboy hat. I suppose the phrase the great and the good would apply to those who were there, but there was an almost willed understatement to their dress and their demeanour, and a diffidence that I hadn't encountered before, a resistance to any sense of display that I would later come to see as quintessentially English. Dambudzo was all display, his cowboy boots, his Mexican or Zimbabwean poncho, his cigarettes and his cowboy hat. Angela Carter made a short speech, Bill Webb, the Guardian literary editor, made another, and some kind of plaque or scroll, or maybe even a cheque was handed over to me and then to Dambudzo. Did I make a speech? I must have, because after me, Dambudzo spoke, and then the fireworks started. He talked about the stench of colonial patronage coming off the very idea of the award, about a similar sense of colonial patronage he had experienced in New College, Oxford. The audience nodded in assent. They appreciated this critique of their culture, which they themselves undoubtedly shared. But this civilized acceptance only seemed to drive Dambudzo to a greater sense of outrage. His voice rose. He grabbed a tray from a passing waiter, scattering the champagne flutes, and threw it at one of the gilt mirrors. Now these were large gold-embossed mirrors, tall enough to display the whole gathering, as the silver tray spun towards their reflected faces, bounced off it, leaving little more than a crack. What amazed me was the response more than the violence of the event itself. A slight murmur of embarrassment, which could have even been misinterpreted as approval, which seemed to drive Dambudzo to an even greater fury. He strode off the little dais we'd been perched on and grabbed one of those high-backed, satin-covered chairs, and then he threw out a different mirror, and then he repeated the process. One often feels that way, doesn't one? Somebody said to me. I don't know whether it was Carmen Cavil or Angela Carter or Ursula Kahn or who there. But one rarely acts it. Dan Buzzo was certainly acting it with 3 or 4 friends now, who either attempted to restrain him or join him in the mayhem. Eventually he was subdued by security, again, quite politely, and escorted outside. It was my first experience of that quintessentially English response to manufactured chaos and outrage against our institutions. Embarrassment. I met Dan Buzzo outside after the revels had ended. He was sitting on the street like an emigre from the high Andes, in his poncho and his black. This was a guy from Zimbabwe, by the way, not the Andes. In his poncho and his black cowboy hat. He had nowhere to stay. I took him back to whatever spare room I was inhabiting. Tim O'Grady's, I seem to remember, a friend of mine. Dan Buzzo slept on the carpet underneath my bed. There was a bottle of whiskey involved, and I was still half beside him when he woke. He began drinking it before I brewed the tea. He talked more about his plight and seemed to find Mugabe an even greater potential oppressor than the foyer of the Theatre Royal, patronage of the garden and colonial Britain. Though he thought he might join me in Ireland in post-colonial splendour. I couldn't imagine him in Dublin, even less in the west of Ireland. At the kind of display that I witnessed happen in the Gaiety Theatre or Amphitheatre, he would have spent 2 or 3 bruised nights in Mountjoy. I told him things were rougher over there, that he might find the experience even more disenchanting. Then he finished the whiskey and walked into the Shepherd's Bush Dome. Okay, thank you. Belush, Tim O'Grady, don't you, Stephen?
Oh, very well.
That was around the time I for some reason I came. Do you remember that guy who used to own that pub? Jerry O'Neill, was that?
Jerry O'Neill, yeah.
And he wrote some novels himself, and
yeah.
he used to. Stephen.
Up on Ballspawn Road.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Well, we didn't really. We hung around similar circles. You were working in the theatre then, weren't you, and stuff like that. But
Yeah. I was doing things like Playboy the Western World of all things, you know.
were you really? Okay.
Yeah.
Was it hard?
What?
No, nothing.
Excuse me?
I said, was it difficult?
No.
Okay.
I thought it was straightforward enough.
Okay.
It was, there were wonderful musicians in it, you know. Tommy McCarthy, Bobby Casey.
Where was it, in the Royal Court, yeah?
No, it was in the Old Vic
Oh,
with the English National Theatre.
okay. Excellent.
Yeah. And the London Irish took over the production. They just came the whole time,
Really?
hung out in the bar and everything. Yeah, it was a moment of gratitude for their identity being considered. Yeah.
Okay.
Mm.
Excellent, yeah.
So yeah, is that the end of that?
That's the end of my little reading of this thing. Now it's up to you.
Oh, sweet divine Jesus. No, I remember, of course, around that time when I met you, and we talked about this the other day as well. You know, it was about the fact that the great John Borman
Oh, yeah.
helped
Yeah.
you get the angel on. You know.
He did, yeah. Well, I saw Stephen the time I remember it was in a production in the Abbey, which was called The Blue Macushla, that was directed by Jim Sheridan.
It was written by Tom Murphy. Yeah.
Tom Murphy, yeah. And it wasn't an entirely successful production, was it? But there was something about it, and about, at the time I'd written a script for Angel, the movie, first movie I made, and I contacted Stephen, and for some reason you weren't in Excalibur. Why was that? You seem to be the only Irish actor who
I don't know, maybe I wasn't really like a kind of Lancelot figure.
Well, you could have been Gawain, could you?
Gawain?
Gawain or something, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know, but no, I'll tell you why was the point that you're making. I mean, I was up to my neck doing field day, you know.
Yeah.
Excalibur happened exactly the same time as we were doing.
Yeah, absolutely, because I saw the production of, I didn't see the production of translations in Guildhall and Derry, but I saw the production in the Gate.
Yeah.
And, Neeson was in it, yeah, and you were in
Nation was in it, but yeah, then he didn't have to do all the running around that I.
No, he didn't. But I'll never forget one line he delivered to the English officer. He just turned casually. He said, "Tell him his tent's on fire." Do you remember that? I will never forget that moment. I don't know why. It was just the casualness with which this enormous dude delivered it. Anyway.
Yeah. He was just. I mean, Liam at that point, you know, was absolutely committed to being a Hollywood star. You know.
Even then?
Oh, completely. Because I asked him to do the second production, which was a translation by Brian of Three Sisters by Chekhov, and he was gone. He just wouldn't do it, you know.
Really? He wouldn't do it?
No, but I mean, he was honest about it, you know.
Well, he did theatre later on with Natasha in New York.
He did it in New York when he had a lot of films under his belt. And soon he got Natasha under his belt. But after he got Helen under his belt.
We won't talk about who else he got on this boat.
I saw him washing himself when we were doing translations in the Olympia, and I shared a dressing room with him, and he was giving himself a good scrub before. I said at the end of the show, I said, "What are you doing?" He says, "Going out with Helen the night." It's true.
Anyway.
He never lost a Ballymena thing, did he?
He don't like to spend money either, I'll tell you that, yeah.
He would.
He doesn't like to spend money either. I didn't say that. Is that a Ballymena thing? I said that.
Yeah, it's a Ballymena cliche.
Okay, sorry. Anyway, he was in Excalibur and Stephen wasn't, hence the resentment he feels. As was Gabriel